Greetings everyone, Slizzle466 here, and in today's video we're going to be looking at an aggregated snapshot for the wild Hearthstone metagame. This aggregated snapshot is built by taking some of the more popular tier lists that are out there online and averaging them out to get an overall look at what the wild meta is, removing any sort of bias or major errors from specific reports. Now, some background, the Tempo Storm, Hearthstone Top Decks, and Rank Star reports, these are all opinion driven by various groups of experts, and the Vicious Syndicate report is data driven with the write-ups done by experts based on data that's provided to them. So, and one thing to also mention is that I'm not including archetypes that were only mentioned in one report. So you're only going to see archetypes here that were mentioned in 2, 3, or 4 of the reports. So we can see that when we look in Tier 1, there's definitely an agreement between all 4 that Secret Mage, Snip Snap Warlock, and Odd Rogue are the best decks in the current meta. However, the order differs between these archetypes. We can see that Mech Handbuff Paladin is in the Vicious Syndicate, Hearthstone Top Decks, and Rank Star spots, whereas it's not in the Tempo Storm. We see Odd Paladin clock in at Tier 1 for Vicious Syndicate, compared to being in Tier 3 for Tempo Storm, Tier 2 for Hearthstone Top Decks and Rank Star. We've got Reno Mage popping into Tier 1 for Vicious Syndicate, where it's Tier 2 for Tempo Storm, it's Tier 3 for Hearthstone Top Decks, and Tier 2 for Rank Star. So definitely there's some differences between these reports, and we want to try and average out those differences to give ourselves a better idea of what the meta actually looks like. So what we do next is we then want to apply tier scores to these different ratings. So we do that by looking at how many of a specific archetype do we have in a tier, and we basically segment it out between one or between an integer and the next integer in line. So for example, if we look at the tier scores for Tempo Storm, there are 3 decks in Tier 1. And so we take steps of a third to make our ways from 1 to 1 1/3 to 1 2/3. And when we make the final step of 1/3, we move to 2, into Tier 2. So you can see it similarly over here. If we look at Hearthstone Top Decks, we've got 9 decks in Tier 2. So we start at 2, we go in steps of 1/9 to work our way up to 2.8 repeated. Moving into 3 when we do that last step. So we've got all these tier scores calculated for the different archetypes and the different reports. So now we want to combine them together and remove the organization's name from the ratings. So we do this on the following worksheet. And what I've done here is I have listed out in alphabetical order by deck name the different archetypes that have been added to tier lists and their tier score according to whatever snapshot it was given to. So we can see here that because Aggro Druid was mentioned 3 times, we see 3 ratings here, the different tier scores. Big Priest was appearing in 4 of the tier lists, so we see it showing up with 4 ratings. And then the next thing we want to do is the fun part, is we calculate the aggregated or the averaged out tier scores. And the way we do that is we look at just simply take the average of each group of numbers here. So we take the average of these 3 to give us the aggregated Aggro Druid tier score. We take the average of these 4 Darkest Hour Warlock scores to give us the aggregated or averaged out Darkest Hour Warlock score. And so for all of the different deck archetypes, they've now got a tier score averaged out over the different meta reports. Our final step is to then take this data and sort it by the tier score, and this gives us our final tier list. So what I've done here is I've purposely put in the breaks when the tier score switches to a new integer at the front. And so we've got 4 decks sitting in at Tier 1. We've got our Secret Mage as the top deck to beat, Snip Snap Warlock, Odd Rogue, Mech Handbuff Paladin. In Tier 2, we've got Even Shaman. We see Odd Paladin coming in at the top of Tier 2. Again, keep in mind it was rated Tier 3 on Tempo Storm, Tier 1 on Vicious Syndicate, Tier 2 for Hearthstone Top Decks and Rank Star, so we got averaged out at the top of Tier 2. We've got Reno Mage, Murloc Shaman, Reno Warlock. We've got Mech Hunter sitting in the middle of tier 2, Cube Warlock, and then bottoming out tier 2, we've got Jade Druid, Kingsbane Rogue, which is an interesting one. Kingsbane Rogue was only mentioned in 2 meta reports, and it's been slotted in at tier 2, and Inner Fire Priest at the bottom. We can see we've got a very wide range of tier 3 decks, and this is becoming quite the trend in the wild meta, where there are a lot of decks that are good, they just aren't that good against the top decks, but they're definitely playable. So we've got a nice range of very playable decks here in tier 3. I won't read them all out, you can pause the video if you want to have a more detailed look at what those archetypes are. And then at the bottom of tier 4, we have our decks that aren't particularly good in the meta, but they're still not absolutely horrible. We've got Zoo Warlock, Exodia Mage, Taunt Druid, this is like a Hadronox style Druid, Thief Rogue, Reno Shaman, which is the Shadow Walk style list, and Line Cracker, or if you like, Bees Druid. So this is our aggregated meta snapshot. I agree with most of this. I think it's pretty accurate, and I think it gives us a really good overall look of what the wild meta looks like. Now, normally at this point I end these videos, but I want to have some bonus content, because whenever I release these, I have a question from many people on different social media platforms. You've got this aggregated meta snapshot, so which snapshot team was closest to that average? So I've done some additional calculations, and in order for these to work, we do the following. So we've got our aggregated meta snapshot tier list. We've got the tier lists for the different 4 organizations that have been building them, but we are only including decks that appear in all 4 of the major meta reports. So for example, you're only seeing one deck in here at tier 4, Thief Rogue, because Thief Rogue is mentioned in all 4 reports. We see it in Tempo Storm at bottom of tier 4, Vicious Syndicate second last, Hearthstone top decks last, and in tier 3 for Rank Star. It just happened that all the tier 4 decks got removed for the Rank Star reports. So how do we figure out how close these are to the aggregated list or the average? We use a statistical method called a least squares method. So this is where we look at the difference between the 2 tier scores, and then we square it to just eliminate us having issues with positive and negative values. And that's exactly what is done on the following worksheet. So if we look, for example, at Tempo Storm tier 1, Tempo Storm has Secret Mage as the top deck, so did the aggregated metascore, so there's a difference or an error of 0. It was a perfect match. For Snip Snap, Tempo Storm had 3 decks in tier 1, whereas our aggregated has 4 decks in tier 1, so we have a little bit of a difference between the two of 0.0017. Now what's interesting is looking at where are the big differences from the average. So for example, if we look at Odd Paladin, Tempo Storm put it at top of tier 3. This is quite a big difference. Overall average, we had Odd Paladin at the top of tier 2. Moving over to the Vicious Syndicate data, if we have a look over here, we see that Vicious Syndicate was pretty good with its tier 1, but maybe the Odd Paladin was a little bit too high. Moving our way down to tier 3, tier 3 looks pretty healthy, but we can see there's a big error here for Jade Druid, and one of the reasons for that is that specific report didn't have enough data for Jade Druid, so they just kind of estimated it where it would be in tier 3. So that's where we can understand that error coming from. The big discrepancy though in Quest Mage. VS had Quest Mage in low tier 4, whereas if we look over in the aggregated report, we have it in low tier 3. But simply just because of the value differences, we see there's really big difference here for Quest Mage. If we look over at the Hearthstone top decks report, it's looking pretty healthy, pretty close to the average. We see a bit of discrepancy here for the Mechathune and for the Darkest Hour Warlock and the Reno Mage. The Reno Mage looks like it's a little low here, but it was also rated a little high in the Vicious Syndicate one. But it looks like we've got relatively decent comparisons to the aggregated report here. And then if we move over to the Rank Star report, we can see again tier 1's looking pretty healthy. Looking in tier 2, we've got some issues with Cube Warlock's positioning, Jade Druid, Shadowwalk's got a big discrepancy, Quest Mage, a really big one for Thief Rogue, having a least squared errors of 1.3207. Now, one thing, so the final step is then, okay, well now that we have these differences between all of the different tier list scores, which report is the most accurate? And so what we do is we add up the differences, and whoever has the largest difference is the least accurate compared to the aggregated, and whichever report has the smallest difference is the most accurate. And this is what I came up with. We have Hearthstone top decks coming in at first place with a least squared error of 1.791. We have Tempo Storm coming in at second place with a 3.198 score. We've got Vicious Syndicate coming in at third at 4.212, and Rankstar very hot on Vicious Syndicate's tail, but coming in at fourth at 4.25. So I'd like to hear what your thoughts are about this aggregated snapshot, looking at the accuracy of the different snapshots. Feel free to drop a comment below. While you're down there, you can hit that subscribe button to support the channel. And until next time, hope to see you again.